this game is pretty fun, but there's something off about it. Like, I don't know, there's just something wonky about this game. Like the physics that get more broken with your frame rate, to uncanny looking characters, and environments that obstruct your view of necessary collectibles. What about the load times that are even worse than the original games, so much so that they had to add fidget buttons to them to keep you occupied? This game just reeks, and I have to ask, what the hell happened here? Like, the original Spyro games felt so right. From their music, to their art, to their mechanics, it all just flowed together so smoothly, seamlessly, and believably. But by comparison, Reignited Trilogy feels hodgepodge, like a rushed mess. It's like the plastic display food that they put in the front of restaurants. Looks pretty good from afar, but once you get up close to it, you realize it's just kind of fake. That's what it's like playing this game. You slide around, but you never really feel like you're controlling a dragon. More like a soapbox car on ice when you're on the ground, and when you're in the air, you feel like a flying turd. The devs made a big deal about consulting with the original developers at Insomniac to get Spyro just right. Well, I think that was more for the cutscenes than the actual gameplay, because when you run around in this game, it just feels like a half-assed fan game. Like, you can tell that it's an Unreal Engine derivative work, and that's not a compliment. As mentioned earlier, certain things just break when you turn up the frame rate on PC, like the platform movement doesn't work anymore. Spyro himself gets slipperier and his jumps don't go as far. Like, what the fuck is that? Even on console, where you're locked to an underwhelming 30 FPS, the game still struggles to maintain even that on higher settings. So it's not that the game is terrible or anything, it's just poorly optimized, which is such a shame because it really takes away from the work that the artists put into crafting some of these highly detailed environments and character designs that go so much beyond the original games. In fact, let's talk about that for a moment. The characters in this game are pretty adorable, you gotta admit, like the dragons and artisans all now having their own special artisanal outfits, or the baby dragons from Spyro 3 innocently crying when you rescue them, just like the original and then some. They nailed the cartoonish, endearing, expressive vibe of that, but there's also other characters that have perhaps a bit too much detail, like the humanoid characters in Spyro 2 and 3, just having this uncanny gaze about them. Like, I can't describe it, it just really unsettles me. It's like when you see a Simpsons character drawn in real life. It's just weird what parts are made realistic and which are left cartoonish. It's total uncanny valley territory. But what's honestly worse than that is that they just don't blend into the environment. They don't look like they're supposed to be there. Like, here's this hyper-realistic Unreal Engine world with complex lighting, shaders, foliage, and biomes in the environment that just go way beyond the level of detail even possible in the original games. And put this world next to all these cartoonishly cel-shaded, overly expressive, and vibrantly colored characters, it's just clashing. Like, the game doesn't know what art style it wants to go with, cartoony or realistic. And don't get me wrong, I think both art styles are great, but put together, they're just not greater than the sum of their parts. Sorry. But moving on, let's talk about the music. They basically recreated the game's soundtrack using higher fidelity instruments, making for tracks that are generally more understated and dynamically nuanced. Alright, all that music critic bullshit is great, but there's something to be said about the simplicity of the original old soundtrack. I mean, how different are the vibes here between old and new? Where the old soundtrack is in your face, the vibe is unmistakable, but by comparison, the new soundtrack in the context of the game, it's more timid, it's more reserved, and that really takes away from the whole vibe here. I mean, look at this final level, like the intensity should be as high as possible, and it's almost there, but in the original game, it is spot on. If nothing else, consider this.
I have to, within the atmosphere of that level, have a lot of different changes happen, but stay kind of in the atmosphere so that it can survive repeated listenings.
Repeated listening was a focus for Stewart when making the original game's soundtrack, but once you hear the Reignited Overture title screen music once, you've heard it enough times. I guarantee you that on your 4th or 5th time opening the game, you are going to be so tired of that music that you'll train yourself to have the game muted on startup. It's not a bad soundtrack, but it just can't stand repeated listening. It's celebration, fan music, not menu music, not music intended for a video game. But that's just my opinion. But who cares about my opinion? Let's talk about the facts of this game. Like, for example, the load times being sometimes 2, 3, 4 times as long as the original games just to go from level to level. How is that acceptable? Last I checked, this is a remake, a better version of the original game from 1998, an era which is known for having particularly bad load times for 3D games. Spyro the Dragon in that time was considered a pioneer in the industry for having different levels of detail for the environment and invisible load zones that were so seamless throughout the levels that you wouldn't even know that they were there. What about the release of this game? Like back in 2018, they didn't want to give us all 3 games on release of the Reignited Trilogy. Believe it or not, they just wanted to release Spyro 1 at first and then give us the other 2 games gradually with updates. Well, fans obviously weren't happy about that and caused an uproar, pressuring Toys for Bob to crunch the final 2 games, way underbaking them before their release. This caused all sorts of weird game-breaking glitches and crashes that you can still see documented online today. Now luckily, a lot of these glitches in Spyro 2 and 3 were patched after release, but the remnants of this mad dash for the final 2 games can still be felt to this day. Like the skateboarding in Spyro 3, in the original games you can preserve momentum between ramps and gain speed throughout the course, but in Reignited, your skateboard jump is just totally nerfed. Like, you jump on flat ground and you just lose all of your speed. But when you do it on a ramp going 2 miles per hour, you can clear a whole canyon like Homer Simpson. There's just no sense about it. It's totally arbitrary physics, and you see this over and over with the vehicles and side characters in these games. Like, they're definitely well thought out, but they're just not as good as the original, I'm sorry to tell you. But this is just my opinion, and to be fair, there are some sections that are a little bit more improved from the original, like the Sergeant Bird sections, for example. Those were a nightmare on PS1. So it's not all bad, but the improvements are too few and far between. The original games had a magic to them that's just totally indescribable, and that's just totally lost here. Like the physics, the aesthetics, the music, the weird glitches, and botched release, it all feels like a bit of a downgrade, honestly. But does that make it the worst game ever? No, honestly, this game is fun to screw around in and appreciate the goofy characters and vibing out with the fodder just in the home world. That enjoyment, it just doesn't last in the same way the original games do. I've been speedrunning Spyro 1 for over a decade because that's a game with truly no skill ceiling. It doesn't get boring. The physics beg you to optimize them. The world beckons to you to explore it. But this remake, it feels like such a cheap thrill by comparison. Fun for an evening, maybe a whole playthrough, but after that, it's just as easily forgotten as the next remake. And that's a shame because honestly, with a little bit more time in the oven, this game could have really stood the test of time. Imagine split-screen multiplayer or co-op with multiple people going through this game, all trying to sabotage you as you try to collect the gems, or maybe custom maps where you can create your own challenges. Do what Halo Master Chief Collection did and let you switch back to the original graphics, music, and everything with the flip of a button, so that way you get the best experience of both worlds, the original and new. When you think about it in those terms, you really start to get a picture for what's missing here. There's an excellent foundation here, but it's just not enough infrastructure to power a player-driven content base. And while the modding scene for this game is strong, it's just not enough to keep it afloat from the originals. Instead, Toys for Bob wants to make failed arena fighters and redesign their website 50 times, while the real magic is waiting there, right in front of them in this game, waiting to be expanded upon. I really hope that we see more of this player-driven game design moving forward, if we see a new Spyro game at all. But let me back up one more time and say, hey, if you like this game, I get it. It's chill, it's fun, it may be a little rough around the edges, but it's a good time. I'm just a guy blinded by nostalgia with expectations of this series that are maybe a bit higher than your average gamer, and I acknowledge that. But I think we can agree that there is something more to this series, Spyro, that draws us in like no other game. It's the openness, the otherworldliness, the vibe of this whole game world. It's something that deserves more love and attention, and I appreciate Reignited for attempting to garner that, even if they did replace the guns in Twilight Harbor with Splatoon goop blasters, and made the Skelos Badlands Bone Dance guy do the Fortnite floss. Ugh. I think Toys for Bob needs to realize that their audience isn't children anymore. We want something deeper from our experience with these games, not just better graphics, not just a silly Fortnite dance. We want to connect with these worlds and each other within them. We want to create our own levels and challenges that can keep this frankly dated collectathon game design fresh, that it's a concept that Toys for Bob just hasn't nailed yet. So I'm hopeful for the future. Even if we never get a newer, better Spyro game than this, I'm glad we at least have Reignited Trilogy so that people can at least play the game on Steam and just get an introduction to Spyro before really taking a deep dive and seeing what the series is all about. And if you know what I'm talking about, you know what I'm talking about. I'm going to keep making videos about the vibe and the aesthetic of Spyro 2 and 3, the liminal and weirdly playful yet inviting nature of these games that just hasn't been matched by any other. So I'm going to keep doing my thing, and in conclusion, Reignited, it has me feeling conflicted. On one end, I really want to like it as much as I enjoy the original games, but on the other end, maybe there's just some part of me that knows that no game could ever do that. And maybe that's kind of a good thing in retrospect. Thank you so much for watching this video, and hey, do you agree? Do you disagree? Let me know in the comments down below. I had to get this video out because I get asked about this remake all the time, and I'm definitely curious about you guys' opinion. I realize that I'm very biased and based in the way I look at this, so feel free to share your thoughts and experiences with this game. And until then, my name's Dayoman, and I will catch you in the next one. Peace.
Damn.